Get ready to tune into stories of average men striving for greatness, to become the leaders that are needed in their homes, in their career, and their communities. This is the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast.
Hey, this is Scott, and in this podcast, I'm chatting with Aaron Guyett. Aaron is the founder of Leadersh, the education director of Living.Fit. He's an infantry instructor with the Marine Corps Reserves, and he's the chief leadership developer for specialforcesexperience.com. You guys, this interview kicks ass. You want to listen. We're going to talk about rites of passages for your kids. Aaron has built out a fabulous system to ensure that you give them the experiences and the learning opportunities to really tap into becoming the adult they are called to be. That's Leaders. He also talks about homeschooling and how that was kind of not his vision, but how it's worked for him and his family. And then we do talk and broach upon the topic of Afghanistan, since he has gone through this and fought overseas. He had some really encouraging and great perspective on that situation. So listen up. Hey, before we get started with our interview with Aaron, as a man who desires to live up to his full potential as a father, husband, and leader, you need a tribe that will challenge you and help you grow. If you haven't joined the Brotherhood of Fatherhood Facebook group yet, be sure to hop on Facebook and search the Brotherhood of Fatherhood. Join the most valuable group online for fathers, where you can get practical and tactical advice and support to be the father, husband, and leader you are destined to be. Also, hop on Instagram, follow Scott Ramage or Brotherhood of Fatherhood, and you'll get fed all of the information from these podcasts. You'll have all the updates and have some seriously good input on some conversations, or you can just read them and study from afar. Now on to our interview with Aaron. Hey, Aaron, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott.
So you and I kind of have a lot in common. So I really kind of want to unpack a lot of the things you're doing, because they are really, really big passion points in my life. And so I just love hearing what other men are doing to basically improve other men. And you've taken it like five steps further, which I'm super pumped to talk about. So first of all, why don't you just start and tell us kind of some of the things you do, because there's a lot here.
Yeah. If I'm not trying to win any awards for like packing stuff in, but the thing is, I had a professor of mine tell me in my master's program that I did at Vanguard. He said, if God opens a door, I just walk through it. And so then that's basically what's happened with me. And so that's kind of where I'm at. It's like, if God opens a door and I have the capability and it's not like evil and immoral on the other side of that opening, I'm walking through it. So yeah. So, Leaders of Leaders I founded Innovative Results, back in the day, sold that. Then I founded Battle Ropes Education, sold that to Living.Fit. Now I'm the education director for Living.Fit, helping to kind of build that model inside of that fitness, side of what I do. But then Leaders of Leaders is like really my passion project, much like your Brotherhood of Fatherhood, which by the way is freaking amazing name. I love it. So yeah, Leaders of Leaders. And it's about that. It's a systematic approach to intentional leadership. I don't know how to not have a strategic and tactical mind both, right? So I see things from 40,000 foot view, see things boots on the ground. And so then that's, I'm trying to help leaders understand how to grow leaders, as opposed to, I think a lot of times leaders just try to develop as many followers as possible. I'm like, all right, follow me.
I don't think it's leadership, honestly, but yeah.
No, I don't either. It's good. It's okay leadership. It's good leadership. It's not great leadership. That's for sure. And so as what stemmed out of that is basically overnight, God put it on my heart to, do a discipleship program. But in that, I was already doing a rites of passage curriculum for my kids. And I'm like, this needs to be a nonprofit, because I don't want to charge anybody for this. This is information that just needs to be in the hands of people that want to walk this stuff out. And so I'm like, I'll just be crowdfunded /donated donation fueled organization. So I created a nonprofit out of Leaders of Leaders. It's a 501c3 now. And then underneath it, it houses the systematic approach to intentional leadership, which is that leadership model, but then also rites of passage for children, so that they have, instead of just learning how to drive a car and turning 18 and being able to smoke cigarettes and look at porno mags, and turning 21 and being able to drink beers, better rites of passages, ones where you had to earn it and you could fail, but then also with some safety parameters, but like for sure putting in that trauma and that challenge that I think is so important into any true rite of passage. And then of course, ceremony at the end of that. So I've got a 12-year-old, a 16-year-old, and an 18-year-old rites of passage that I'm doing with my kids, and guys like Angelo Cisco, that you know, and other friends of mine are like, I fucking love that. I want to do that with my kids. And I'm like, sure, take it. You know, I just send them the curriculum. Like, this is what I wrote out. You can change it as much as you want. Like, go check it out. And then 100 in his strength discipleship. Discipleship in Christ, I think, disciples making disciples is going to be the most transformative way we can change the world. I think about what's happening in Afghanistan right now. And I was like, man, if every Christian that said that they were a Christian actually acted like a Christian and then actually discipled other Christians, it would only take 16 and a half years if it was 6-month discipleship, one-on-one discipleship, for us to really have the entirety of the world being Christ's disciples. And if we were Christ's disciples, the travesties that we're seeing over there would not be happening. That's a guarantee. And I think that's the most effective way I can actually create impact and create change, is by doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on that call in my life. And so I don't know, here I am. Oh yeah. And I do reserve time with the Marine Corps. So when I'm not with this nasty stash, I shave it off, and then I go down there and I instruct Marines and contractors in basically pre-deployment training for them to go off in deployment. And I teach basic 1,000 level infantry skills like marksmanship and land nav and things like that. And so I get to do that for 45 days out of the year, which is like kind of a cool little Marine Corps vacation. And then I don't have to deal with all the bull crap. Sorry, I should have asked if I could cuss on this. And I already
want
did
people to be
the whole
authentic.
time. So.
Authentic matters.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the one kind of prevailing habit that I have, that I look at and I'm like, when God puts this on my heart to completely eradicate it, I will. But right now, it's like, I don't know, it's just so infused because of the Marine Corps and my upbringing and whatnot. Yep. So yeah, it's a hard habit to kill. But that's it. That's kind of like some of the hats that I wear.
That's a lot to unpack. I want to start right away. Well, I have about 5 places I want to start, but one of the most recent messages or posts one of our guys in the Brotherhood of Fatherhood made was like, I need to understand some ideas, or I want some ideas for rites of passage. And he's like, my son's turning 16, and here I have a son turning 18 soon, and another son who's 13, going to be kind of entering that age. And the conversation is just like, what have you guys done? And all these ideas came along. And unlike you, like I'm an operator. I can operate all day long, but coming up with the structure takes me a long time. I had to go do it. Then I come up with it. So that tactical from the very beginning, planning and tactical, is the part I don't have. So when I didn't even realize this before we talked. So you said that, is like, holy cow, this is what our guys need. I mean, like literally are asking for this. And that post was starting to get quite a bit of following. So, you know, how far along are you in that process? What does that look like? And this is a nonprofit. This is a thing where guys can come and get resources from you and then pay. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I would just share my Google Drive with them, and then they could see what I've built and then pull it, download it, change it, whatever. I mean, at some point, it will probably be a little sexier and have some marketing, wrapping and bows and stuff on it, where maybe it's like, hey, if you could donate X amount of dollars to get this. But right now, I just share it with people, and I'm like, yeah, here. I mean, some rendition of this is going to be better than no. rendition of this. If we're not implementing it for our kids, I believe that we're setting our kids up for failure. We can already see that in our day-to-day life and world right now. Like kids are unfortunately just not set up to handle friction and trauma and triggers and, all of those things. And quite frankly, I mean, even, we see it with PTSD and stuff with guys that come back, whatever. We're not set up with the tools to be able to kind of unpack and have that trauma be a growth thing as opposed to a stress disorder thing, right? So it's post-traumatic growth or post-traumatic stress disorder. You really get one or the other. And a lot of that is like tools on how to be able and principles on how to be able to walk through that well. And so I want to give that to my kids. So I thought it through all the way to when they are adults. I want them to be able to be confident and competent in their abilities when they turn 18 to know that they've got this thing on lock. They can go out and they can establish autonomy and mastery and feel a sense of purpose and meaning in their life. And so I thought, so reverse engineer, like if that is what I want to be able to teach and parent intentionally with my kids, reverse engineer, then what is that going to take? And so, for the 18-year-old, basically my kids, they have to, for the 18-year-old rite of passage, they have to be able to have either started and failed or succeeded at a business or a nonprofit. They had to have had some sort of long-term outside of the United States missions. And so long-term, at least, I shouldn't say long-term, short-term to long-term, but at least a couple of weeks, if not like a month or 6 months or 3 months or something like that outside of the United States. Everybody in the United States needs to get out of the United States to realize how amazing the United States of America is. You go to India, you go to Afghanistan right now, Afghanistan at any point really, Iraq. I was in Moscow, Russia. I've been in some of the islands in the Caribbean or whatever. Like we've got it really good here. And it's not perfect, because we're human. And so humans are really good at not doing things perfectly, but we've got it really good. Anyway, so outside of the United States, inside of the United States as well, some sort of mission or ministry, some sort of civil understanding. So we have something in Idaho called Idaho Youth Government, where you get to go take over the Capitol for a day, but you got to learn your particular trade or your particular position. So are you the governor? Are you a legislator? Are you a judge? Are you a lobbyist? But the cool part is then you learn and understand our government a little bit better. So some sort of governance and civics lesson. And then they don't have to go to college or university. And then I'm actually going to try to convince them that might not be the best choice unless they're trying to become a doctor or veterinarian or something like that. But they've got to apply to at least 3 colleges or universities, 5 scholarships, applications. And then they have to score well on their ACT and SAT. I think the more important and crucial thing, they have to do a trade. They have to learn a trade. So my brother's an electrician. I've got another friend who's like a brother who's a mechanic. Those are 2 really great trades, and it starts off paying really well. So they can always fall back on their trade if they need to or want to when they turn 18. And so that's basically between 16 and 18, they have those 2 years to accomplish those things. So people are like, oh, where's the academics? Well, from my understanding, if we're homeschooling, they should actually be done with their academics at 16.
Yep.
And so there's a 16-year-old rite of passage that you finish your academics and then we go do that. And if they don't, that's fine. We still have 2 years to figure that out and walk that out. If they want to go to a traditional public high school, I think they'll be old enough to make that decision at that point. So they can do that as well. But then they're going to have to fit a lot of that into their summers and into their off times. But there's, where there's a will, there's a way. This being an entrepreneur, right? You could totally do this. So that's the 18-year-old, the 16-year-old. Then to prepare them for that, I thought they need to have something that's extremely difficult, that's guaranteed to have psychosocial friction, environmental friction, physical difficulty, physical challenge, mental difficulty, mental challenge, planning and strategy challenge. right? And then some sort of training evolution challenge to bring them to that point. And so I thought, well, what's more perfect than having them do at least a 10 to 14 day backpacking trip where they lead our entire family. So once you put our entire family in there, it's like, I'm there. So as a safety measure, but I'm really there to be led. And so if you're going to screw it up, I can just watch you screw it up. And so my wife and I have this agreement, like, hey, if they screw up, we let them screw up. If they get lost, we let them get lost. Like, only if our lives depend on it do we step in and actually help right the ship, or figure out where we're at. But then if that happens, then they know they fail, and then they've got to go back to training, and then they've got to try to do that rite of passage again. And so, but a backpacking trip, you have to plan for supply. Like, how are you going to create, your supply caches and exchanges and all of that? You got to plan the route. That means you have to know land nav. You should also know some sort of medical, right? Buddy aid, self aid, first aid type stuff. You've got to know how to pack. You've got to know how to do wilderness survival, right? You got to know how to start a fire. You got to know how to pick a route. You got to know how to make last minute decisions. And then you put the family into that. And now you're guaranteed to have communication conflict, right? Yeah. So you've got to be able to start communicating at a high level, leading at a high level, like from the first step. Because if you don't, things are going to fall apart. People are going to get pissed. And then you're going to be stuck with everybody that you don't want to be stuck with on this, 13-day, 10-day, 14-day, extravaganza or ridiculousness. But then the other thing is you have to plan. So you have to do accounting and budgeting. You've got to actually do some sort of physical training plan, because you can't just jump right into that, because then everybody's going to be smashed, right, on day one. And you're just all going to be pulling each other, to the next points as you go along. So that is their 16-year-old rite of passage. But then I thought, I don't want to set them up for failure. I want to set them up for success. So that we have a 12-year-old rite of passage, and it's a 5-day. Each day has a physical component and a mental, spiritual component. And so the beginning is them paraphrasing what they believe and why they believe what they believe. So the cool part of these rites of passage is it actually puts the accountability on the parents to make sure that we're intentional about teaching these things now, when my daughter's 9, when my other daughter is 6, when my son is, he's about to turn 3. If I'm not intentional in teaching these things, then I'm setting them up for failure on their 12-year-old rite of passage. There's like marksmanship involved in it. There's survival involved in it. There's first aid, buddy aid, AED, CPR, all of that, all the stuff that I've learned in the Marine Corps, I get to gift them with. But as well, like all the things that my wife is teaching through the academic piece, they get to actually utilize it. So it actually makes them want to study it, makes us want to teach it, because if not, the purpose is, it should be the purpose is for the greater good of humanity, and for their, for the greater good of them in their adulthood. But oftentimes we forget about that stuff, and everything is just about checking boxes and, getting your attendance and, passing, but not actually learning. And so to me, it's like, let's learn how to learn, and then let's learn things that are going to be needed for these rites of passage, that then we'll be able to have them with us. And even if we've forgotten, we know how to go resource them and reference back to understand, okay, I need to relearn X trade or X academic understanding, or this mathematical formula or whatever, because now I'm in this position and I need that. And so, so that's where we're at now. We're just walking out it's seemingly mundane of learning with intentionality, but with a purpose behind it.
Yeah. You hit so many little points there. Number one is one of the very first values that the co-founder Josh Price and myself came up with was we're commissioned to raise future adults. And you just basically laid out, like, when you look at a very good leader, a very good successful adult. Now, I'm not defining success as a career, because that doesn't define anything, but when you look at that and you backward construct it or deconstruct it, you're literally building in the building blocks that are so incredibly important for success as you go on. And you hit three things that I cover and talk about over and over and over, and I'm super passionate about. One is failure. I think failure is an absolute must. There's just, something even, so my perspective is a little different because I messed up early on. I was career focused, bro focused, really kind of a misaligned identity, and raising my very, very young boys. I was absent because I was building, epic businesses and doing whatever it took. And then moving forward, you just learn from your experiences. Now I'm 48. I have a 13-year-old and almost an 18-year-old, and I'm doing my very best, kind of backing into it. But looking at what you've done is so phenomenal. I found myself this year. My son's turning 18. And I'm just so extremely thankful because he's gotten really into the leadership end of a very, very, very competitive marching band, which I would have never picked, but like he's so passionate about it. And we're like in the top 10 in the nation, his school from Texas. You do everything big. So he's traveling all around, he's doing all these crazy things, but he gets into this leadership, the highest level leadership they have. And it's run all the positions are named after other military things. It's very much run like that. And, he'll come home and he's just stressed and he's like, I don't know how to deal with this. And at first I'm like trying to give him the answers. And it's just like this, that's what we do. We just like, I want to give you the answers instead of, I'm going to let you fail. I'm going to give you maybe a little foundation here and some ideas, but I'm going to go let you do it. And man, it's been such an incredible experience. His growth has been just absolutely astronomical in the last few months, just really having all this pressure on him, all these younger students asking him, looking up to him, and then, behaviors based on how he's directing them. It's just been amazing. So failure is absolutely such an important part. Intentionality is, you hit it on the nose. I don't even know. That is like the most intentional plan I've ever heard for youth being raised into great adults. And I was public educator for 13 years, having gone through that and watching what's going on in our world. I'll plant my flag in the ground and say, if I were to start over right now, I'd be homeschooling. Zero question about it, because there's so much opportunity. And like you said, like the learning should be done at 16. There's so much wasted time. And, and so I'd love that. And then doing hard stuff. I've told the story a million times. That's why I have a picture of a buffalo or bison behind me, because those guys, when a storm is coming, they run into it. They run straight for it. They decide to run through it so that they can, weather it quicker, get on it, get past it, and grow. And thrive, really. So I'm just like totally blown away by what you've done. But like the challenge is, we're so, as a society, we're so tuned into guarding our kids, and like, ooh, that's going to be a challenge. I don't want them in it. And so, man, I love what you're doing. Let's talk a little bit about homeschooling. So you have, your oldest is 9, and have you homeschooled from the very beginning?
No. So I would have never have even had our kids homeschool, but COVID happened. They were like, oh, we're going to teach your kids on screens. And I was like, no, we're not.
Horrible.
No, we aren't. You guys might, but we are not. So I started looking at some other options. And then that's when, I went to a couple of like homeschool summits and like seminars and stuff. And I started to calculate all of the wasted years in my life.
Yeah.
I was like, man, I wasted 8 of the 12 years of my life. And the thing is, it wouldn't have been a waste if there was a lot of challenge. And I had some really good teachers that really helped me out. Right. So I'm not bagging on the whole thing, but I was like, man, but so much of it was just a waste and not challenging. And for me, like, I was pretty smart. And so I could just not do the homework. I could go out and smoke weed and party and do whatever, and then come in and even high, like ace the test or get a B on the test. And then I pass the class and I'm okay. Next one. And it's like, man, imagine if I would have been challenged like I was challenged in the Marine Corps, when I left high school, because I was so hungry for it. Imagine, the whole story might have been completely different. And I'm happy about my story now because it puts me in that perspective. But yeah, so we would have never have done it, the homeschool stigma, the weird kids, all that stuff. But the thing is, like, with technology, with access to information, and with access to all of these extracurricular activities where they can socialize and socialize at a way better level than socialization tends to happen in classrooms and stuff. Because maybe you socialize between classes in high school, or if you're in one class with one teacher, it's like you socialize a little bit at recess and then kind of in the back corner and get yelled at by the teacher, here and there. But it's not real socialization like when our kids go to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or they go to gymnastics, or they go out and just play, right? And just create their own games and things like that. And so, man, I was like, oh yeah, we're not gonna have the weird homeschool kids for sure, because they're gonna be highly socialized in a bunch of different environments with around a bunch of different really good leaders. That the cool part is, if that leader sucks, like if the gymnastics coach or whatever is just horrible and is abusive or something like that, or toxic, I could just pull them out. If that happens in school, it's so hard to pull your kid out of that classroom and put them into a new classroom. So yeah, there's just too many benefits and then also too many risks and issues and stuff with the public school system, and even private school. We were paying gobs of money to send our kids to private school, with this higher expectation mentality and things. But yeah, homeschool is now, it's like, I wouldn't do it any other way.
I was just having a conversation with my wife, and her and I have we come from a long line of educators. So we have some very, our kids will finish in public school. They're at the age where they've heard us with the messaging over and over again. But when I taught, I started to think that parents could come in and watch. Parents were invited to come to the school, walk through the hall, come to your room, sit down. And I loved it. And it kept me really, really sharp. And, I would, if you're a listener of this podcast, you've heard this before. I didn't fit in education because I was all about the experience, giving kids, like, what do you want to learn about? How do you want to learn about? Let's go tackle it. And the curriculum, when I first started early 2001, actually, my first week is September 11th. So I watched that on the screen on my way as soon as I got to school. But in 2001, but in that time, I had a lot of autonomy in the content, and it was beautiful. It was absolutely incredibly engaging. And then it got more and more and more directed. And you just became a machine. You plugging kids into this box, and it's been like that forever, but it has gotten so bad. I was telling her, we were talking the other day, I'm like, you realize we're not even allowed to go in the school anymore. And we have this is Texas in a high property tax area, really, really amazing schools. The teachers are super happy. We're not even allowed to step inside the school at all. And unless it's open house, and no less, like, what is going on in those classrooms. I was talking to an educator, and he's like, last year, I didn't even see the other teachers. We weren't allowed to meet together. We were in our own little room doing the screen thing, and massive teachers quit because it was so stressful. That was the year before last, excuse me. And then last year you're still in your own little eco bubble, and it's changed, and there's no accountability, and that there's no, like, put a camera. I know it's weird, and I would have thought it, but put a camera in those freaking classrooms so we know what's being said. At the end of the year, like, son texts me. He's in middle school. He texts me. He's like, look at my yearbook cover. And it was like stickers from the year. The most prominent was gay pride, not voting, but Biden. And then Black Lives Matter's the actual organization sticker on there. And we're like, are you freaking kidding me? Well, it comes out that this art teacher had done this work, told the staff or the administrator kids had done the work, and they're like, and she'd been passing out Black Lives Matter stickers. And this is in a very, very conservative area. So I look at those things and I'm like, those are outside of, like, where, like, they're just too politically driven for a school to be in. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm guiding that conversation. I'm not saying anything about any of those topics, but I know where I stand and how I want my kids to understand those topics. And I was so proud. My son is like, this is very uncomfortable and I hate it. That's the text he sent to us at 12. I was like, yes. But if that can happen in schools now behind closed doors, no one knows about it. And then the conversation or the dialogue around it is, well, this is what the kids wanted, which was very skewed. That's a scary situation. I want nothing.
Yeah, it is. No. Yeah, exactly. Well, and the thing is, like, parents, when we send our kids to school or whatever, we lose some of that ability to be their mentor, to be their teacher. And we just thought, man, how amazing is it that, especially if a parent cares and a parent is intentional, like we know just looking at studies in that, like those kids are going to typically end up way better. And so how cool is it that we get to take that opportunity to really do what humans were doing like 100 years ago. It wasn't that long ago, 150 years ago. So we get to also teach them things that, we never would have been able to teach 150 years ago. It's like, no, I'm going to teach you the craft that I know. And then that's what you're going to do when you grow old. Now it's like, no, I'm going to teach you as much as I can teach you, but more importantly, I'm going to teach you how you can learn. So then you can literally do whatever you want. Right. And, and there should never be, to me, it's like, it's not about politics. It's not even like we could take current events and then let's teach critical thinking about that.
Absolutely.
Let's teach logic about that. Let's teach how to process these things, but I'm not going to teach you how you need to think. That's my way of thinking. Like, man, even as a parent, I don't want to do that with my children. I want to give them values that are actually solid and logical and common sense values. And I want to give them truths, but I don't want to say, oh, you need to think this way. And if you don't think this way, then you're a horrible person or you're the enemy or whatever. Yeah.
And that's where I draw the line when that starts to happen in the school where teachers like, you need to think this way or you're just wrong. In our home, our whole goal, very much like what you just said, is here's the underlying values we have. And then we want to have those conversations. And now our 17-year-old son is able to have those conversations and speak from his own point of view. In fact, he goes and researches things on his own and talks to him. I'm like, whatever, that's awesome. Like, let's have this conversation. And it's very, I'm just blessed that wasn't, maybe my wife had more to do with that than me. I think the other thing that I've noticed is I do know a lot of homeschool. There's a lot of homeschool kids and in our community. And I went to this ninth grade kind of rite of passage type year-long thing with my son called Man Up. And our church does it. And you go and you shoot guns and you learn gun safety and you learn how to actually repair a tire, not just swap tire, and you do all of these tie a tie, all these things. You go through these lessons for quite a while. It was really cool. But there was a lot of homeschool kids in there. And I noticed, I think there's really what has happened for a long time is there's the homeschool kids who are homeschooled because their parents are isolationists. They're not about other people. So they take them and they keep them all here. And then those kids come to this world and they're the most awkward. And that's where my son, I was like, I want nothing to do with that. I can't even talk with those kids. They're so freaking weird. And and I'm there going, yeah, they're weird. They're weird. How to have social interactions. But then there's parents like you that take their kids and my friend Alec Jowdy and all these, they take their kids from very early on to BJJ and they take their kids and they're in gymnastics class and community sports and all these things. And there's so many opportunities to have community and to develop social skills. Yeah. So it's
if you're homeschooling because you want to be an even stronger helicopter parent, it's like, man, we were already talking about setting our kids up for failure. Yeah. I mean, that's even more so the case. It's like, that's the last thing that I'm going to do. And the thing is, my wife's maternal instinct is to protect, and that should be, I think that is a feminine trait and a maternal, instinct. And so that is a good thing. in certain dosages. But when that becomes the thing, like, man, that's where it's a detriment to the personhood and the development of this human, right? To be an adult and to be able to, okay, we have this conversation all the time in our house, and it's like, oh, I'm afraid, or oh, I'm intimidated, or oh, I don't want to do that. Well, why don't you want to do that? Well, I'm getting nervous, or I don't know if I can do it, or, all these things. And it's like, well, what, this is awesome. We get excited, like, this is awesome. Well, why is it awesome? Well, this gives you an opportunity to practice courage. And courage isn't doing something in the absence of fear, like just having this fearless, it's like, no, having fear and doing it anyways, like having fear and doing it, and just this continuous, mantra that gets spoken all the time in the home. And that can't happen if you're helicoptering at the highest level.
No. So I want to kind of transition here from your perspective as a guy who's gone through combat. You've been in the military. You're self-proclaimed prepper since you were 9 years old. All of these things. Like, one of the things that I really want to scream from the mountaintops, and that I've learned over the last, I don't know how many years, is just as men, you've got to go and challenge yourself all the time. You've got to continually be challenged. I have regular practices that set me up to be embracing suck almost every day. And it's not just the gym. It's got to be things that step a little bit outside. And I've noticed this kind of rolling over and over. I have the Stories That Sell podcast, which is more about the stories that lead people to excellence in their business and success. And a very recurring theme is, one of their daily things or weekly, they always do things that are really hard. Whether it's, hey, every week I make sure I'm doing a ruck, and it's got to be harder than it was the week before. Or I just chatted with Brian Alexander, who does a long fast every month. He's like, it just is so hard. And that sometimes it's 10 days, sometimes it's 3 days, because it's just going to always be really hard. And it's always challenging me. Very common theme over and over again. Many men right now were born and raised soft. They weren't born soft, but they were raised soft. They were raised in an environment where we protect, we cover, we make sure you're not uncomfortable. Oh, you're not doing great on the team, you can quit. It's no big deal. And so we have in my opinion, a massive problem with men who just don't understand the power of being challenged. So I want you to talk a little bit about that, because like what I'm looking for, and you mentioned something earlier, my next thing, because I'm doing it to myself all the time, but my next thing is having someone else do it to me. I want to go through something really hard where it's even stepping me into a more of that pain cave and that place in my head where I really have to work, because I know someone else will push even harder than I can myself. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, I'd love for you to kind of chime in. And you talked before we started recording, you talked a little bit about some of that stuff. Plus you've been, you've been in the past an instructor for, I believe, battle ropes, and you've done a lot of stuff on there. So you're into the fitness thing and then the military. So why don't you just jam on that for a bit?
Yeah. So first, right out the gate, I'll just plug specialforcesexperience.com or the specialforcesexperience.com. So I'm the chief, I think now, leadership developer for them. Before I was chief physical strategist. Sort of the same role. There's a physical component, but then there's a lot of it is like really layered in leadership. And so with the specialforcesexperience.com, you can check out something called the process, which is like an 8-day special forces selection process. And that there's all sorts of layers of adversity and trauma and stuff in there, for the person that's looking to have that be done to them, for sure. And you could be former military or civilian. But most people that go are civilian, and they do one in Canada, and then we just started, but we're doing one in the United States. And I basically, it's a Canadian tier 1 operator. So it's like our equivalent to like SEAL Team 6 or DevGru is what they call it, or Delta, right?
This
the highest level.
Husband?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jeff Dupati. Yeah.
I met him. Yeah. All right, cool.
There you go. So
awesome.
Yeah, cool.
And not know you're part of that. So this is even better.
Yeah. And actually Rick Alexander has something that he is working on called the Art of Adversity. Similar but different. So it's not really a selection where you can fail and be gone, But it still is very obviously art of adversity. So it's very hard, but then there's kind of a Sherpa, a guide going with you and kind of helping you along the way and helping you unpack some of the stuff. Because there's all sorts of like internal things that are going to come out when you hit physiological adversity, right? Which is why we should do physiological, but I'll get into that in a second. And then there's something that's it's a softer serve in that it's online and you can go at your own pace, but it's called the trials, and it's a 12-week kind of pre-recorded process. Not process. I mean, it is a process. It's a journey for sure, but it's a 12-week ordeal, 12-week course. And there's a physical component, and then there's a mental component, and then there's a trials component. And now we've just added kind of a nutrition component to that. And so then that's another sort of way that you can get into that if you want to have it sort of done to you and learn and glean from some sort of course other than your own, personal adversity stuff. But something I was telling Angelo is, so I've always sort of microdosed physiological trauma since a young age. Like, I just like to run, like weirdly so.
Yes, weird.
and I liked to run to the point where I felt like I was going to have to quit or fail. It was like this really weird, like inborn thing and so much so that I would get timed in PE, and the PE instructor would talk to the cross country coach and would talk to the track coach. And then they would encounter me like in the hallway or whatever. And hey, we really want you to run track, or we really want you to run cross country. And I'm like, no, I run for me. I don't run for sport. Like I play real sports.
You make them really mad.
But yeah, I'm sure. Now I look back and I'm like, man, why didn't I do that? I could have totally done that. But I played soccer and I wrestled and I played football and whatever. So, I mean, that's where those things came out. And then it came out in the Marine Corps as well. And then also, cold showers are a great example. Like I get anxious every time I have to take a cold shower. And in Idaho, the cold showers are even colder than they were in Southern California. I'm like, oh, this is horrible. But that is good. Like having to, self-regulate, focus on breath, all of those important things where we can tap into our parasympathetic nervous system or autonomic nervous system and drive parasympathetic as opposed to sympathetic, to be able to think cognitively when we're experiencing trauma. Like these are a couple of tools that we can carry. But lately, what I've been noticing is something that I started to do as sort of an entrepreneur coming out of the active duty Marine Corps back in 2004 is stepping in on purpose over my head to try to do something that's bigger than me. And then learning that there's a new paradigm, there's a paradigm shift and a new equilibrium, a new homeostasis that gets established where now, we're operating at a higher level. We're able to be cognizant and cognitive about more things. We're able to delineate, delegate, right, at a higher level. And so, of course, like I do right now, Living Fit we're about to launch an app. We're helping build a small group training model for all of 24-hour fitness. And so that has me, way in over my head. And then on top of it, I'm like, let's build my own house. So now we've decided to build our own house. So I've got to learn coding and, all these things. But it's like that to me, I mean, those are the I can choose into things that are difficult, things that are hard. I can fail forward, learn to fail forward, learn that failure is okay. Like, because failure, as long as we learn from it, like just gives us that stepping, stone to take that next step or whatever. So yeah, I like the physiological stuff is awesome. And I will always and continue to have that be a part of my practice. That's what has brought me to that psychological. And then need I even say spiritual, like, God has opened up cans of worms that I didn't even know existed, right? With my, emotional care, with my spiritual formation process and spiritual disciplines, that I didn't even know it existed. It's like, here's this can of worms, like, but then the cool part is then it makes me remember that I can humbly approach this. I shouldn't have this air of hubris where I'm like, pride is leading. I did all these hard things so I can, do more hard things because man, I'm amazing. And it's like, yeah, it's good to have confidence, but it's not good to have pride. It's not good to have that, too much ego. It's not good to have hubris, because that's when, the Jim Collins, How the Mighty Have Fallen, right? His book is so good. It's like, it's hubris that brought them there. They were super successful and able to, overcome all these challenges that now they think they can overcome every challenge, have no mistakes, and do the same plan over and over again. It's like, no, that's not life. Like, that's not how we live out our life. We're going to encounter new seasons that are totally new, that are, have never been seen before. So we should be seeking out wise counsel that have experienced these things, to learn from them, and also be okay with the fact that you're probably going to fail again, even though you've succeeded so many other times. Probably going to fail. You're probably going to get humbled, and it's okay. Like, these things are good for us, but to sit there and not pursue a challenge, to not try to do something that's greater than yourself, man, like, you literally stagnate, and then you die. Like, you are dying. Like, you are a living dead person. And I walk around and I see zombies, walking. It's like, dude, pick your freaking shoulders up and pull them back, and know that you have so much unfulfilled potential in that soul of yours, and you're just letting it just wane away. You're just letting it, go out to sea, because you're not taking that step because the thing felt abrasive and frictional, and you didn't like that feeling. And so you went back into your comfy, safe, convenient bubble that we've created in the United States, which is great. But it's like, man, it should be the confidence to step out into new frontier, to step out into new land.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that I do now, and some of the ways that I approach that.
That's really good. I don't get frustrated. I used to get frustrated, but I'm literally baffled when I'm around other men my age who are just living in a, just easy, nothing. They don't want to do anything that's challenged, don't want to step out of their bubble, super happy and content, but they're not. The story is they're super happy and content, but you just don't see life. It's just zombie land. One thing I have really struggled doing is cold water immersion or cold showers. Now, I do live in Texas, and cold showers in the summer, it's still a little jolting.
It's cold. Yeah.
But but I still feel a little wimpy. I'm really working in it. But that's one thing I love about that. I have a buddy that lives in Canada. He lives in, I think, Alberta. And like, he has to break the ice in his tub every morning and go and get in it. Right. I mean, he videotapes it. He does lives, and he just breaks it, and then he gets in, and you see this, and it's all about that breathing. What I love about that is almost no matter how often you do it, you never adapt.
No. Yeah.
And that's really intrigued me. I've tried multiple times and failed. And now I'm like, every day I'm like, I just have to do it, because if he can get in Alberta, where I don't know what the temperature is, -20 Fahrenheit every day, and break ice and get in, like, I'm being a complete wuss, not being able to have a cold shower for 1 minute or whatever the time is that I'm working on at that point.
I'm a wuss with it too. I did a 10-week Wim Hof. I've taken his other coursework or whatever. And then even now I'm like, how am I still getting anxious and freaked out? And once the water hits you, like, what is going on right now? That's the beauty of it, for sure.
So practical advice from you. So let's start with me, because I'm very selfish, but I know there's a lot of guys in my shoes. So I'm 48. I've rounded the area of my peak that actually I'm stronger than I've ever been. But there's, like we were talking before this, I had my quad just snap on me just doing my first workout today, and my body just breaks easier. So in this position, you talked about this special forces experience, you talked about some other things. A guy like me, I work out every single day. I do fast walk, ruck, at least 25 to 30 miles a week. It's just very consistent, lift every day. What would something like what I would do, even though my body isn't what it used to be, it'll break easier.
And you mean in terms of like sort of a
experience?
Yeah. Like a culminating event or something like that. Yep. So, honestly, there's a couple of ways that you can approach this. One, so I joined, and this is when I was in my 20s, but it would be the exact same now. I mean, obviously I'd be a better swimmer now. But I joined Masters Swim, like a Masters Swim, and they're all over the United States, right? I think they're all over the world. And you could probably just, call your local pool or whatever and see if they have a Masters program, Masters Swim program. I joined that, and, so they have lanes, and the far left lane. So for you, far left lane, right, is where the slow swimmers are. Like, they didn't have a lane for me. I was so slow and so crappy. Yeah. But that was actually something. It was a long-term experience of a lot of trauma. But then the cool part is, like, I got better at it. And not like horrible trauma or whatever, but I was like close to drowning. Like, and I was in the Marine Corps. I had tried out for something called McQuist. So it's like basically a water survival course or whatever. And I couldn't make it. That was the one thing that I couldn't, I just failed. It wasn't that I quit. I just failed. I had to tread with a brick over my head, and I was treading with the water over my head as well. And you just can't do that for that long. No. So something like that, I think is incredible, because you think about it, it's super low impact, right? But it's really high resistance, and not just water resistance, but it's like really difficult. It's really challenging, and you will learn, and you'll be able to measure your success as you get into the next lanes or whatever. And maybe you only move 1 lane or 2 lanes over, but you move 1 lane or 2 lanes over from where you started. Something like that, I think is really good, a really good kind of culminating event. But even the 12-year-old rite of passage that I wrote, I would do it myself. I would have an adult do it. And you can have sort of, bumpers, like, when you're bowling or whatever, you can have those little bumpers, because each day when you're done, you get to go home, you get to go sleep, you get to go whatever. But then the next day you got to get up, and there's a new challenge and a new thing that you have to confront in a new realm. And so, I'll be able to share that, whether it's through your Facebook group or through your website or straight up to you or whatever. But even just doing that, and you don't have to do all of the academics or whatever that are involved in it, but there's a lot of physiological and psychological challenges. The art of adversity that Rick Alexander's putting together, I think that would be perfect. The 12-week, the trials would be perfect. And then the trials would let you know, okay, I was able to complete that and do that. So now do I want to level up? Is my body physiologically able to, level up and, turn on the volume, turn on some more intensity or whatever, to prepare for something like the process, where it's, you got to have even a higher level of physical shape, as well as you got to be psychologically tough too. But there's definitely psychological toughness that's involved in the 12 weeks. So I put operators that are going into selection. I've put now over a dozen different operators in different high level selections, right? So MARSOC, Force Recon, our Force Recon SARCs, which is like the corpsman version, the medical version, whatever, of Force Recon. SWIC, so Navy SWIC and Navy SEAL. So Rick Alexander was Navy SWIC, but then he taught down in Coronado, basically what you see on television when you see all the Navy SEALs go through their horrible time, Hell Week, and before that and beyond that, right? So he was an instructor down there. And then also PJs, so Air Force PJs. And I put together a 6-month and a 12-month program. And part of the deal with the 6-month and 12-month program is there's a ton of volume, right? So you're basically, it's a progressive overload of volume. Because I know if you can progressively overload to certain hours in a day of volume, then that means you've got a couple of things going for you. One, physiologically, you'll be able to handle a lot of different load from a lot of different angles, and all of the physical hard stuff that comes at you will still be physically hard, but you'll be able to handle it because you've kind of been in these situations before in the training, whatever. And it was dosed to progressive overload. So it's following science as opposed to just like smashing you and seeing if you break, right? Which is a lot of like old school military mindset. And they're wanting to come out of that mindset, but there's still a lot of that culture going on there. But then the other component is you're able to do like really boring things solo for a really long period of time. Like that to me is way harder than, getting beaten. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Because if I'm getting beaten with a bunch of bros and we all know, like, hey, as long as we all stay in this together, like we're in this together, like it sucks, deployment sucks, or, push to Baghdad sucked. Right. There was like, we were outrunning our supply chain, we were running, or we were running out of water. We were running out of food. We weren't clean, the entire time, never clean, getting in firefights, getting shot at or whatever. But it's like, hey, we're in this together. And then, so you look back on it with rose-colored glasses. During the time, it was brutal and shitty and, embracing the suck, like you said. But if you could do that alone, man, that's a whole other level of mental toughness. And so that's another thing that they got to carry with them into their selection. And then just the brutality and the monotony of consistency. But how, that water dripping will create a hole in the rock. But the rock is way harder, way stronger, way tougher, we would call it, than the water. But that's not true. Like the water bores a hole just by its sheer consistency. Over time, at some point, I'm going to get through this thing. And to be able to have that mindset is, I think, just an incredible skill that I think we can build. And obviously, DNA, I'm sure, plays a role that some of us are maybe predisposed to this and are already kind of a little bit better at it. But it's not that you can't learn it. It just sucks to learn, right? Staying consistent day in and day out on something, even if it was a passion, right? And it becomes difficult and it becomes work. Like, to me, that's when our purpose becomes epically clear. The meaning in our purpose becomes epically clear. If it's true purpose, right, that we have established, like, we'll stay at it, even when it sucks, even when it's hard, even when it's monotonous. And so so stuff like that, I think is what we can carve out, especially as we get older. And hormonally, we're just not where we used to be, right? And injuries tend to happen a little bit more and stick around a little bit longer, right? I'm rolling jujitsu, and finally, I'm to the point where I'm conditioned. I just started doing it in May or April, end of April. And I'm finally to the point where I'm conditioned where it doesn't create, as long as I stay at a certain level, it doesn't create like new pains and things like that. Now, obviously, accidents can happen because it's one person against another person or whatever, and then I can experience pain and injury and things like that. But I was injuring myself, like just over gripping. I had over gripping injuries. I had shoulder issues. I had scapular issues. I had hip issues. I was like, what in the heck? But I took, again, consistency over time, and then knowing when to pull back, right, and rest and recuperate and recover and things like that. And then, okay, go back in. And then slowly over time was able to microdose to a level where, okay, now I can roll pretty hard. And with even like the spaz white belts and then the really seasoned black belts or whatever, and not feel like I'm going to do trauma and damage to myself. But yeah, it just took a lot longer because I'm 40. I'm not 20 anymore, where I could get that injury. And then the next day I'm back in there bouncing around. Oh, just shake it off. No big deal. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the message of the time, I really talk a lot about habit stacking, just starting small and just 100%. continually, almost to where it's worse to not do it than it is to do it. Like today, because I injured myself, I can't walk. My day starting with a 45-minute out there, and I have my whole process around that. It totally throws everything off. And that used to be hard to get to do every day. I don't want to do it. It's a waste of my time, all these things. Now, same with lifting weights. It gets to the point where I am off if I don't do it. And that's what creates the breaking through the rock, right? Just that monotonous bloop, bloop, drip. And it's hard. Yeah. It's really hard. I don't know how you're doing on time, because we already are. Are you good? Okay. Because I want to, you've talked about your experience in the military. You've talked about being deployed overseas, and I know it plays a large role in your own personal development. I've heard the story of your journey from, becoming a believer and how you've kind of processed and worked through. But I really kind of want to touch on something that's really sensitive to a lot of guys who've served. And since you are one of those guys, I want to talk about the current situation in Afghanistan, but more importantly, how to handle that and what you've kind of been going through. We don't necessarily get into the political end, just the processing and.
No, I'm bringing politics. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't care, but I just.
Yeah. You're like, well, bring it.
Yeah.
So this is, we were talking before we started, where we might cry or whatever. This, I don't know. We'll see. I feel like maybe I'm cried out. I don't know. It's so funny. I would tell people that my tear ducts got seared in boot camp, and I really didn't cry. Like from, I think 14 years old, I just decided like, this is just not going to happen. And it was actually not healthy. And so I didn't really, I remember in church, I was probably like a couple months after I was saved, I just started like bawling and I couldn't stop. It was like, when you see the ugly cry with the kids and like, hey, I'm gonna grow up, it was totally like that. I just couldn't. I was like, you need to drive me home. It was cool. It was a really amazing Holy Spirit experience. It was like, I was just overwhelmed with God's love for me and his forgiveness and all of the horrible, crappy things that I had done up until that point. So it was pretty amazing. So basically it's a 3-pronged answer. And I think all of these responses are absolutely valid. And actually Rick Alexander and I were talking about this on the phone, and he's like, I told guys like hold on to what you're feeling, like feel that feeling right now so that we can make better decisions in our future, right? When we're entering into agreements or potential agreements with the things, the relationships that we have with people. And then on a larger scale, obviously nationally with other nations and stuff like that. Like what are we willing to commit? What are we willing to do? And so let's feel the pain of this moment so that we don't experience the crap that is going on right now, the just horrible travesty that's going on right now. So obviously there are some military still there. There's thousands, literally tens of thousands of Americans and then allies that are stranded, outside of the airport and stuff like that. We're seeing, kids get handed up over like HESCO barriers or whatever to Marines or soldiers or whatnot, and then they're either taking them to care for them and then give them back, or they're taking them to live a better life. And that's like how much people are literally holding on to jets and then falling off, of course, because that's what you would do if the jet goes 200 miles an hour or 150 miles an hour or whatever. Like you're not going to hold on to that, or getting crushed by the wheels as they come in, right? The landing gear as it comes in, because it's so bad. And so then, obviously the so bad is where that's like the sticking point. That's the frictional point for anybody that served in Iraq or Afghanistan, or just anybody that's a U.S. citizen. That, like, my wife is crying, tears, because she's like, what the heck, and so a lot of my buddies have basically created a defense mechanism that's like the ethics, like, F them, let the world burn kind of a thing. And I don't necessarily think that that's healthy, but I think that that's still a valid vantage point and a valid thought to have. It's because it's like, it's allowing them to not have to grab onto the travesty and feel the pain of that. And so they're protecting themselves at this point, right, by saying, F it, let the world burn. Unfortunately, I don't think that stems from a deep sense of purpose and meaning. If I believe that if you have a deep sense of purpose and meaning, it's really difficult to start doing that because, right, these are all humans, these are all individuals that matter. But at the same time, I totally understand that perspective and sit with that, right? Hold space for that, feel that, and then ask, so then what does that mean, right? What does it mean, let the world burn? What does it mean to just say F it? And what does that mean to you? And how is that working in your life? And what that might do is, okay, so maybe things might shift. Some values might get removed or added or aligned in a way to maybe bring a sense of purpose and meaning into your life, because you just see this lack of, and how much utter despair that makes you feel, how empty that makes you feel. and how hurt that makes you feel to try to, bridge some sort of connection with that trauma and with that travesty. And so I think that there's good and positive that can come out of that. And I also think that that's a very valid perspective and a very protective perspective.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to take that from anybody that's feeling that right now. And I've got buddies, like really close friends that I went to combat with and have seen some shit, and they feel that. And I'm like, yeah, man, I just had actually one of my buddies, we had a text back and forth, and I just shared with him how I was feeling about it. And he's like, man, I just never really thought about it from that viewpoint. And he's like, man, that's a lot of food for meditation and food for thought. Thank you. And he thanked me for that. And, I'm like, yeah, well, thank God, not me. But the second one is why were we there? What was the point of all this? Why did I watch my buddy like stop breathing, and like my buddy doesn't exist anymore. And I'm over here. It didn't happen to me. I wish it would have happened to me. Right. Kind of a thing. And it was for no reason. Like, we're just giving it back to the Taliban. Like, dude, that's super effed. Like, that is not cool. And so obviously there's sadness that comes with that. There's despair that comes with that. There's anger, frustration that comes with that. And again, all of those feelings are absolutely valid. And we should hold those and feel those again, so one, it didn't happen for no reason. So I remember I had tea on the hood of a Humvee with this guy that owned this land in southern Iraq. So he was, I'm going to screw this up. He was Shiite. He was Shia, right? And Saddam Hussein was Sunni. And so all of his sons were either killed in the Iraq-Iran war, killed by Saddam Hussein, or imprisoned and probably being tortured, right? So all of his sons. He only had daughters left. And so he's having tea with me and thanking us profusely for what it is that we're doing. And so and the same thing in Afghanistan, right? We've worn their clothes. We've had dinner with them. We've had tea with them. And so that provided space. That provided a capacity and space for a potential of hope. It provided hope in that time. And so rest assured that hope still exists. We've now planted a seed of liberty, civility, love, freedom, whatever you want to call it. We've planted that seed by our presence there, by fighting alongside these Afghan soldiers and interpreters. We've planted a seed, and a lot of times people are like, oh, well, the Afghans didn't want enough. No, they died at a way higher rate than we died. And they continue to die at that high rate. Even when in 2014, we've only died in single and low double digit numbers, which is still, I get the argument, we shouldn't even be there. It's never going to work. They're too tribal, all of these. And I've read The Bear Goes Over the Mountain and The Eagle Goes Over the Mountain, all these books on the tactics and strategy of all of that. And, how it's such a difficult place, and, sort of the geopolitical perspective of that region, and how difficult that is, and how much they're going to have to fight, for that in order to retain it and hold it and have it. But the thing is, we planted hope. So I think that the person that sat in is what was the point? So it's sort of the story of, it's that fable or fabled story or fable or whatever of I think it was Chinese fable or something like that, Japanese, something where the dad's like, we'll see. But, it's the dad's supposed to serve, can't serve or his son has to serve or whatever. His son ends up breaking his arm, I don't know, and can't go and serve or whatever. So every single part of the journey, right? Every single stage, it seems traumatic and horrible. And the outcome is going to be so bad. And we're thinking, into the future, oh, this is so bad. And he's like, I don't know, we'll see. and then the bad ends up turning to good, and then the good ends up turning to bad, and the bad ends right, and so on and so forth. And so, I think that there is hope for that. What we can't understand as humans, we're pretty intelligent. We can wrestle with some really complex thought, but what we don't know is sort of that butterfly effect, right? Sort of that chaos theory effect of like what happens now and how that might change what will happen in the future. And so the smallest little act now might drastically change some scenario in the future. And so a small bad act or even a big horrible act might drastically change the future for just an even more incredible good. And, and I don't know, a lot of times it's easy for me to see the United States as sort of this like worldwide bully where we just pistol whip, blind kids or whatever, because we have such this strong power in our military. At the same time, like I had Tia on the hood of that Humvee, and that was a good instance, for certain. And there was good that came out of that, regardless of how you play out all the other geopolitical things and stuff like that. It's like, I can hold on to that and know that that was good. And the same thing goes in Afghanistan. You can hold on to those moments where you watched your buddy die, or you sat down to tea with somebody, or, you gave hope to a people that didn't have hope. Like there are some kids in Afghanistan right now, they're 15 years old, 16 years old, and they have never experienced the oppressive regime of the Taliban. You don't think that they're going to be rubbed a little bit wrong by now the Taliban stepping in and doing what they're doing? You don't think that that's not going to create some sort of a little bit of an issue for them mentally, spiritually, physically, right? Where they're going to maybe want to do something. And there's still fighting going on. There's still Afghans that have strongholds that are wanting a better life for the entirety of Afghanistan. And so there's still hope. And I mean, I know there's bigger geopolitical things like China and, all of these other things that are going on. But so that's the second, right? And so I think that we can hold out hope, and there's things that we can do. And I'll talk about that with a third. The third thing to me, where my heart, I get it. I'm saddened. I brought tears to my eyes again to think about, buddies that have died or Iraqis that have died when I was in Iraq or whatever, for no reason, because I just got turned over or whatever. But to me, it's the humanity of it. I see each human, regardless of their belief, of having incredible worth. Each human has such incredible. And so a lot of this has been overwhelming in me coming to Christ and me being a believer. I remember I went to India one year, not a believer, but I went on a short-term missions trip. And what I did was like the F it, let them burn kind of a thing. There's such intense poverty there that it's palpable. You could feel it. You could smell it in the air. You could see it and you could feel it. It's horrible. And I remember it was so horrible that I didn't want to feel any feelings. And so I got really good at like just separating those things. So I put it in its little box and I put it over here and I was like, F it, let the world burn, right? Let them do whatever they do. The next year I was saved, right? So the next year, so that was early 2009 or late 2008 when I went. The next year, May 21st, 2009, I was saved. I went at the same time to the same places, and I was brought to tears, crushed by the souls. And I think we need to feel these feelings. We need to hold space for them, just like those other, perspectives. You need to hold space for that. You need to see that as valid feelings. And then, okay, so what does that mean now going forward? And so for me, it's like, I need to hold space for this. And for me, it's fueled. I tried to hop on a team to go over there. That didn't happen. That was like too last minute or whatever. But then I realized I was actually thinking about it, and I was praying about it in the morning, actually yesterday morning. And I was like, so imagine if a Christian truly acted Christ-like in their life, and were able to disciple another person in Christ to act Christ-like. So Christ-like is sacrificially loving people, servant as a servant leader. And so if God was me with my strengths and my abilities and my intelligence and my body, in this time, in this day, right here, what would that look like? How would that get walked out in my life? And so I was reading a book called The Master Plan of Evangelism, and they're like, do the math on if one person was to disciple another person, and in 6 months, those two people then discipled another person to then disciple another person. It's the whole Leaders of Leaders thing. It's the whole Brotherhood of Fatherhood thing, right? It's exactly that. It's being intentional with somebody. So imagine if that happened 6 months at a go, right? 6 months. In 16 and a half years, the entire world would be disciples in Christ. And so I thought about that. And so what it made me understand is, right now, I do have connection. I do have influence. I have the opportunity to be intentional with people, to be sacrificially loving, to forgive even my enemies, and to wish them well, and to wish them this overwhelming sense of love and experience that I have. And that can be far more pervasive. That can create far more change for humanity. And then you won't see the Taliban beating women and an 18-month-old getting crushed by mobs because they're trying to run from the Taliban to get on these flights. These things won't happen because people will be walking out a much higher sense of humanity than, oh, me and mine. Like, I want power, I want money, I want control, I want this. And I mean, it's happening in Afghanistan at a really incredible level where it's very vivid and very easy to see and feel that, pain and suffering. But it's happening in the United States too. Maybe a lower level, maybe it's getting controlled a bit or whatever, but it's still happening. And so then that's my third thought on it, is my heart just breaks for the human that is there. My heart even breaks for the Taliban, and I pray that they can experience love in a way where they don't feel like they have to crush people and beat people and kill people that don't believe what they believe. But they can use words and use love to change people's lives versus violence and fear. And so don't get me wrong. Like, I train with very violent tools because, I don't want to be stuck at the end of a barrel of a gun with my kids with me and just cower and be frozen with fear. I want to be able to protect them and give them an opportunity. At the same, it's the whole Bruce Lee, I'd rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. Yep. Right. And so, so that's my thought on Afghanistan. Hopefully that helps your listeners, your followers, the group on Facebook. It is brutal, and man, it just sucks. And so as I said, there's things that you can do. There's groups right now that are sending in teams. So one of them is, what is it called? I got to look it up here. Save Our Allies, saveourallies.org. Tim Ballard, he does Operation Underground Railroad. He started something called the Nazarene Fund, and they're sending people over there. And then also there's you have to go to my Instagram at Aaron Guyett to see it, but I'm going to screw it up. It's like Strong Oak Foundation or something like that. And it's a former vet or a former Marine, a vet who's helping other veterans, but he's also helping allies. And he's actually going over there with his son, I believe, to get on some of these fast react missions. So there's civilians that are doing what politicians are too afraid to do right now.
Sounds like
they're taking, and they're nonprofit organizations getting funded by people that care and going over there. So you can fund, you can pray. And some of you might have certain skill sets where you can be a part of it. I put my name in the hat, and it didn't get taken yet. So we'll see. I'm sure that if my boss heard me say this, he would be furious, but I have talked this over with my wife, and I've done some, missions down in Tijuana and stuff like that for, to liberate women from sex trafficking. and human trafficking. And I'd be totally willing to pursue those things again. And my wife is like, yeah, if you go and do this, because her heart is just shattered. As I'm sure most of the listeners' hearts are shattered when they see stuff like that as well.
Yeah, I can't. That's why I asked, is because it's heartbreaking from my perspective. I never served, never even thought of it. No one introduced it to me. It just wasn't even a thought. And I would have been right in the mix of Iraq, but I needed to hear that perspective, and other men like me and other men who have served and are really hurting need to hear that perspective. And so it's actually a perspective of hope, which is what we need. And I think that's honorable and the right way to think about it. Well, I want to wrap this up, not because I'm done asking you all sorts of questions, because I really do feel like this is like 2 or 3 more episodes, but I want to wrap this up to honor your time. And I always ask every man that comes on this, the last question, which is, when you pass away, if you had an opportunity to kind of see the way that your children were raising their children, what would that look like? What would you say my legacy has been passed on? What would you see? How would they be living their lives?
Yeah. So my personal values are Christ-likeness, sacrificial love, and servant leadership. And actually, Angela helped me carve those out. I think I had like 20 values. It was like, maybe less, maybe do less. So I think first and foremost, if, and so they're my personal values, but they're also our family's values. They're also our homeschool values. And so if, number one, I think if my children had those as their 3 most important values, I'd be like, yeah, you're amazing. But then the other is, actually putting some handles on it and putting it into the world. Are they acting with autonomy? Meaning being able to be free to make mistakes and make choices with these values in their life, and figure things out. And so we try to build those things in them now, in the small ways, because they're young, but that will get bigger and bigger. Autonomy will get more and more pronounced as they get older. And then are they in pursuit of mastering something, at least one thing, whether it be parenting, like you said, success isn't necessarily career, money, or whatever. It could be, impact. It could be ministry. It could be, there's a million ways to cut that, right? But are they pursuing mastery in some way, shape, or form? And then, has God showed them clearly? I believe Christ-likeness and Christ. It's like we have a purpose of discipling other disciples in Christ. That's pretty evident and clear in Scripture and Bible. But beyond that, it's like, but you have individual strengths. You have individual aspects and abilities. And so if they also have purpose, and not that there needs to be more purpose beyond discipling other disciples, but do they have purpose beyond that? And so autonomy, mastery, and purpose, staying true to those values, I would be floored and amazed and so incredibly grateful if that was being walked out as adults.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. I know those are near and dear to your heart. So, and I love it when people talk about their personal values. I think there's so much value in, excuse the repeating of words, but in really having those defined. And like you can have a massive list. This is an encouragement to men who haven't done this. You're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know how to put that together. Get somebody to help you. And as soon as I did that, it was like, oh, this is cool. It's really kind of refined down and it's very clear. Have your values. I talk about value ladder, know the order of those values. So for
100%,
I'll say it 100 times. Like I know some men will be like, you crazy, but God definitely comes before anything else. And then my wife, then my kids. I know it's Brotherhood of Fatherhood, but you cannot serve your kids if you're not serving your wife. And so
100%.
Understand those, make every decision based on those, act on those. And so values are paramount in understanding the direction and guiding your life in the direction you want it to go. So I'm really appreciative that you shared those. Yours are epic. Those are pretty good.
Thank you.
So Aaron, you mentioned it earlier, how people could find you. There's AaronGuyett.com. I think I'm saying your last name correct. Yep. At Aaron Guyett. Is that Instagram and Facebook or just Insta?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, Facebook might be Aaron Davis Guyett, but you'll find me if you search Aaron Guyett. There's another Aaron Guyett who's on the East Coast, and I've watched him grow up from a kid when he first got on social media to now he's like in the fitness industry. It's pretty cool. I'm like, oh, cool, man. So there's another Aaron Guyett out there, but yeah, you can Google Aaron Guyett and I'll pop up.
All right. Yeah. And of course, Leaders of Leaders, which I think most of the men, that there's a lot of men going to be looking at that. And I really encourage them. And all of these links, you guys will be in the podcast notes. Always just go to Apple Podcasts or any podcast. Actually, we put them in the notes, as well as, if you follow me, I'll be connected because I'm going to go follow all of these. And because I absolutely love what you're doing, Aaron. And then of course at Living Fit, we got to put that in there, and 100 in his strength. All of these, I'm just absolutely fascinated and really excited to watch them and maybe be a part of something at some point. So really thrilled. It's really great to meet you. Really thankful to Angelo for connecting us. Such a cool dude.
Absolutely.
And just really glad to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'm honored, blessed by this whole time that we got to spend together. And I'll look forward to a lot more time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for listening to the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to share it with your friends, your family, and follow us on social media. If you are a father, make sure you join our Facebook group, the Brotherhood of Fatherhood. Hit the subscribe button and tune in next time for more podcasts from the Brotherhood of Fatherhood.